I work as an Uber Eats driver during the nighttime to earn some extra money. Fridays and Saturdays are usually the busiest nights because people are either at home or hanging out with friends, so those are the nights I typically work. On a Saturday night at 1 a.m., I received a request to pick up a McDonald's order for a customer named Kyle. I remember it was a calm, rainy night with occasional distant thunder striking. He lived just a few minutes away from my current location, so I plugged in the nearest McDonald's, which was a quick 2-minute drive, and grabbed his order. It was a small order, just 2 hamburgers. I followed the directions provided by the app, which led me to a short, dead-end street branching off another dead-end street. Kyle's house was the last one on this dead-end road, situated next to a line of trees running alongside a nearly deserted highway, given the late hour. Rather than ringing the doorbell, I decided to call Kyle's number. It rang once, but then went straight to voicemail, so I ended the call. However, I soon received a text from him, instructing me to come to the door, so I obliged. I reached the substantial wooden front porch of the house, and after a brief moment, the front door opened. A bald gentleman greeted me, though he appeared younger than expected, likely in his 30s, with a completely bald head. Perhaps it was by choice or due to illness, but I didn't pass judgment. However, I couldn't ignore the unpleasant stench of alcohol on his breath, which made for an uncomfortable encounter. The payment process was handled through the app, and there was usually no need to wait for cash. However, on this occasion, Kyle requested that I place the food on his kitchen table while he retrieved a tip. I had no qualms about receiving some extra money, so I waited in his kitchen, which was dimly lit by a small nightlight plugged into an outlet. The entire kitchen had an unpleasant odor, though I couldn't quite pinpoint the source. As Kyle took an unusually long time fetching the tip from the basement, I began to explore the area. I ventured into the living room, where the TV provided the only source of light. Unfortunately, the stench in this room was even more overpowering. It was a putrid smell, one I had never encountered before, and it was utterly disgusting. It was then that I noticed the back door was partially open, possibly for ventilation purposes. Hoping for a breath of fresh air, I approached the door, but the smell only intensified. I stepped out onto Kyle's back deck, and the sound of buzzing flies immediately caught my attention. A motion-activated light suddenly illuminated the area, revealing 2 large black garbage bags containing 2 elongated objects. The smell was unbearable, and it didn't take long for me to grasp the grim reality of the situation. Waiting around for a tip no longer seemed like a wise decision. I quickly returned inside and rushed to the front door. At that very moment, I heard Kyle ascending from the basement, calling out to me and waving a few dollar bills. He spotted me about to open the door and inquired about my hasty departure. I needed a plausible excuse, so I mentioned that I needed to check something in my car. Kyle seemed to accept that explanation and handed me the bills. Then he turned his attention to the still open back door and porch light. He looked back at me with a somewhat unsettling grin, which was slowly fading. In a firm voice, he questioned whether I had ventured into his backyard. I swiftly denied it, and he continued to stare at me, remaining silent. At that point, I was no longer concerned about politeness. I opened the front door and made my way outside, with Kyle attempting to grab my shoulder. I forcefully removed his hand from my shoulder and sprinted to my car. I heard him in the first few seconds chasing me, his footsteps only a few feet behind me. The panic got the best of me. In my life, I've never run so fast. My heart pounded, and my breaths came in quick, shallow gasps as I tried to steady myself. Then, I saw him run back inside with the front door still open. I turned my car on, but I sat and watched his front door, curious to see if he'd come back out. And he did. He came back out, running full speed for my car with a big metal rod in his hand. In that moment, disbelief coursed through me. The man looked like a maniac with wide, white eyes and a chilling look in his gaze, as if he were about to murder me. Without a second thought, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, and my car roared to life. I sped away, leaving the terrifying scene behind. As I drove away from his house, I immediately called the police to report the situation. I made sure not to give him any time to dispose of the dead bodies. I waited a short distance away and observed the police cars arriving within minutes. I provided them with information on where to go. As it turned out, Kyle, or whatever his real name might be, had already begun moving the bags, which did indeed contain dead bodies, to the bushes in his backyard. Everything about this man was unsettling, from leaving the back door open to reveal the grim contents to a pizza delivery driver. It was evident that he lacked sound judgment, to say the least. I used to be employed at Domino's. They closed at 3 a.m. on weekends, and because I was taking a gap year during my college days, my boss consistently scheduled me for the 9 to 3 a.m. shifts. Typically, there would be a minimum of 3 people working during those late hours. 1 to prepare the pizzas, 1 to manage orders, and 1 to handle deliveries. On this particular night, the pizza-making duties were assigned to Jeff, a 28-year-old Italian coworker who held down 2 jobs. Jeff had a perpetual bad mood, so when he instructed me to make a delivery, I complied without complaints. It was a rainy Saturday night, and receiving delivery orders past 2 a.m. wasn't uncommon. Around 2:30 a.m., I received an order for 2 pizzas destined for an address that I vaguely recall as 27 Crocker Drive or something similar. I embarked on my journey in my rather dilapidated 2002 Honda Civic, heading up the road for about 5 minutes. Our town, part of the Manchester Township area in New Jersey, was mostly characterized by a vast expanse of trees and minimal activity. The drive was notably dark, especially after transitioning from the well-lit main road to narrower, unilluminated streets. As I proceeded, my car's headlights served as the only source of light for miles. Eventually, I turned off the public road onto a dirt road marked with a private property sign. It seemed like I had reached the delivery destination. However, as I arrived, I heard a sudden loud bang that reverberated through my car, followed by a noticeable loss of control and a recurring flapping sound. It was clear that I had experienced a flat tire. I promptly pulled over, exited the car, and confirmed that the front right tire was entirely flat. Though I was faced with this unfortunate situation, I noticed that the house I was delivering to was within walking distance from my car. Rather than immediately calling my insurance company for assistance, it made more sense to complete the pizza delivery and seek help from the customer. I made my way to the house's deck, a typical-sized residence surrounded by trees like many others in the area. The lights were on inside, but the blinds were drawn. I rang the doorbell, and within moments, a seemingly ordinary young man answered the door. After exchanging the pizzas for payment, I explained the predicament with my flat tire. Concern crept across his face as he handed me the money, and I handed him the pizzas. He stepped outside to inspect my car with me, which was a short 30-second walk from the house. As we examined the tire, he assured me that he could help, provided he had access to his tools inside. As I was pondering what I could have struck on his dirt driveway, I heard him call out, "Not to worry about it." While he ventured indoors to retrieve his tools, I continued walking down his road, pretending to ignore his comment. It was during this brief walk that I noticed a spike strip in the road, albeit a small one, but undoubtedly the source of my flat tire. I couldn't discern any reason for the spike strip to be there, except for the possibility that he had intentionally placed it. Various unsettling possibilities raced through my mind, so I pretended not to notice the spike strip and retraced my steps, informing him that I hadn't found anything. He looked at me, and I couldn't help but feel that he might be suspicious. However, he eventually turned away and mentioned that he was heading inside to fetch his tools. Uncertain of what he meant by tools, I waited until he reached his front door before hastily returning to my car. I started the engine, shifted into reverse, and began moving. I had no intention of remaining in that precarious situation to find out what he was up to. I could hear the flat tire wobbling on the dirt road as my car inched backward. I made a conscious effort to avoid the spike strip this time around. Once my car had successfully exited the private dirt road and returned to the concrete road, I glanced one last time at the man's driveway to ensure he wasn't following me. Satisfied, I drove off. I couldn't accelerate too much though, as I risked further damaging my wheel. I maintained a steady speed of 10 to 15 miles per hour, periodically checking my rearview mirror. It was then that I noticed something behind my car. The man was running toward me. With no alternative, I stepped on the gas, even though I winced as I could literally feel the damage to my wheel. The gap between my car and the pursuing man widened until he disappeared from view. After returning to the main road I had mentioned earlier, I eased my speed back to 10 to 15 miles per hour. The journey back home was lengthy, taking about 20 minutes due to my cautious pace. Upon my return, the police station would be closing in just 10 minutes, but I had to return the Domino's sign that we were required to display on our cars during deliveries. Jeff expressed his frustration with my extended absence until I recounted the entire ordeal. A coworker who was working the same shift as us listened intently, her face registering shock throughout the narrative. When closing time arrived, Jeff suggested that I drive slowly back home since I lived nearby. He recommended addressing the flat tire the following day. Both he and our coworker left for their cars and drove away. I sat in my car for a while, deep in thought. Eventually, I started the engine and began the gradual journey back to my house. However, I soon noticed a vehicle without its headlights on following closely behind me for a stretch of time. To determine whether it would also pull over, I stopped in front of a small house. The car passed me but then halted on the same side of the street a bit further ahead. Panic set in as I considered the possibility that this might be the individual who assumed he'd find me at Domino's, where he placed his order. Leading him to my home was not an option. Though uncertain whether the car behind me was indeed connected to the earlier incident, I couldn't afford to take chances. I felt excessively paranoid but decided to call the police for assistance. Fearing I might be pursued, I had the police dispatched to my precise location. After waiting for 5 to 10 minutes, a police car slowly rolled down the street, and I honked my horn to get his attention. The officer backed up so that our windows aligned, and we both rolled them down. I gestured toward the car without headlights, which had parked further up the road. However, the car abruptly sped away with its lights still off, vanishing into the night. The police officer activated his lights and pursued the vehicle without uttering a word. I didn't know whether he wanted me to follow, but I couldn't with my damaged tire. Instead, I drove home as quickly as possible and parked my car in the driveway. To this day, I'm uncertain whether the police managed to apprehend the driver. I harbor doubts, but I prefer to imagine that they did. Nonetheless, I've remained vigilant ever since that night whenever I drive home, and I eventually quit my job at Domino's 2 months later.